In the year 70, the first gospel we have written was Mark, and you also notice it's very, very simple. Maybe there's one extraordinary event in that story. There was a man with a white robe on. Maybe that was an angel. In the year 80, we get to Matthew and Luke. Then we start seeing more extraordinary events. By the time we get to the year 80, a half century later, we start seeing these rolling stones and earthquakes and angels. And then John was written in after the year 90, 95 or so. Then we start getting these fantastic. And you know what you can see? If you take these appearances, starting with 55 was Paul, 70 was Mark, 80 was Matthew, 85 was Luke, and 90 or 95 was John. If you count up the number of extraordinary events that are in these stories, you'll notice a curve. In the beginning, there's 0. With Paul, there's 0. With Mark, maybe there's 1. With Matthew, we have 2 or 3. And by the time you get to John, by the end of the century, 60 or 70 years later, we start having these extraordinary events. You know what that shows? That shows the pattern of legendary growth. The earliest Christians did not believe what the later Christians believed. The later Christians believed in all these great appearances and touching of Jesus. But the mistake modern Christians are making, the mistake Mike is making, is that he's looking at the primitive Christians through the lens of the later group, which was the second or third generation of believers who were exaggerating, who were making up the story. Yes, they did believe that Jesus ascended. The early Christians believed it was spiritual. The later Christians, who were not part of the primitive church, believed that there was some kind of a bodily resurrection as legends grow, as they grow and as they develop. Therefore, I can probably, for the sake of argument, 1 minute, I can probably grant most of Mike's minimal points, but interpret it as a spiritual resurrection, not as a bodily thing. Just like when my granddad died, my grandma swore that he kept coming back in the room talking to her. And I said, Grandma, well, that's a hallucination or a dream. And she said, no, it's real. I see him. He comes in, he waves at me, he talks to me, he opens drawers. I said, Grandma, it's very real, but it's in your mind. It's happening in your mind. And so when Peter prayed, Jesus, forgive me, he told his friends, Jesus forgave me. And they said, you saw Jesus? Peter saw Jesus. And so you know how the story grows and how it gets going. And then you know how religious fervor gets into people, especially after their Messiah died. With this disconfirmation, they wanted it to come back. They brought it back in the form of a religion called Christianity. Jesus did not bodily rise from the dead, but something did happen to cause some people to believe that he spiritually rose from the dead.